In this episode, we're going to be going over this comment right here from Nate. Thank you very much, Nate, for the comment. So please feel free to take a screenshot, pause the video if you want to read it in full, but I'll be going over the comment bit by bit. All right. The first sentence we're going to be going over right here. Barium does not absorb into the body. Nate is exactly correct. So let's go to the whiteboard here. Barium sulfate, that's what we're talking about. They said barium in the comment, but the video the comment is about is referencing barium sulfate. So this is barium sulfate if we write it out. Barium, and then we have a sulfur atom and 4 oxygen atoms. That's sulfate together. Now, this molecule is made via an ionic bond. Ionic bond. Why is that the case? Well, barium is a cation, so it's positively charged. The sulfate is an anion, negatively charged. So the electrostatic attraction, all right, so the opposites attract, that's what forms the ionic bond. Now, in the case of barium sulfate, it is a very strong bond, very, very strong. So strong that it is virtually insoluble. Is that coming up in the case? Yeah, it's coming up. Insoluble. All right. That is why when Nate says the barium does not absorb into the body, they're correct because it's insoluble. It can't be absorbed like through the intestines. Now, there's a little bit of contrast. Maybe hopefully it'll help make it clearer for some of you if you're not sure so far. Another example of an ionic bond is something we all use on a daily basis, and that's table salt. Sodium chloride. The sodium is the cation, positively charged. The chloride is the anion, negatively charged. That is an ionic bond as well. However, if we put a little bit of salt into water, it is soluble. Now, if we draw a water molecule, this is not great. I'm not a very skilled artist here, but we're doing our best. That's like a water molecule. You have oxygen here, hydrogens here. Because of the type of bond in the water molecule, the oxygen tends to be more negative and the hydrogens are more positive. So opposites attract. The positive of the hydrogen is going to attract the negative, the anions of the chloride, anions. Sodium is going to go to the sodium cation is going to go to the oxygen, but in this case, it can pull that ionic bond apart. And so sodium chloride, table salt, is soluble in water. Again, just a little bit of contrast there. But the important thing to remember is barium sulfate is insoluble, because that characteristic of barium sulfate is going to come up again and again and again throughout the rest of our discussion here. It is insoluble. Now, that's good, and it's also bad. Like pretty much anything in life, it could be good and bad. Let me use green first. It is good. An example of it being good is it's great for, let me write it over here. It's great as a contrast. Hopefully you can read my writing. Contrast for imaging. So because barium sulfate is insoluble, if someone is using or doing a barium swallow, because they're going to have like a CT scan of their abdomen, their digestive system, they drink the chalky substance and then it coats the esophagus, the stomach, the intestines. Because it's insoluble, it doesn't get absorbed into the intestines, so it sits there. In addition, barium sulfate is radio-opaque, meaning the X-rays don't pass through it. So because of those two characteristics, it's perfect as a contrast because now when the CT scan is done, there's an outline of the, they can see the esophagus, the stomach, the intestines, the doctors, that is. And it provides a contrast to the rest of the body where the X-rays can pass through. Right? So it's really, really good benefit as a contrast for medical imaging, like CT scan. There's two negatives and we're going to be using the rest of the episode to talking about the negatives or potential negatives. I say 2. There could be more. These are just 2 that come to mind. And what Nate talked about. The first one is, he says, that blank, I'm not going to use the word here, trying to keep it family friendly, somewhat here, folks. Family friendly as possible. Maybe PG-13, although that word is PG-13. That blank can kill you if it just sits in there. So that's the first one. A negative of barium sulfate is, what if it gets stuck in the digestive system? No bueno. And then Nate also mentions, plus having to worry about it getting into your peritoneal space. I'll have these comments up here. That's the other negative. What if it gets out of the digestive system? And these 2 are also going back to it being insoluble makes it these negative, hence the red. So now what I'm going to do is, with a little bit of podcasting magic, I'm going to flip this whiteboard over, and then we're going to be talking about these 2 negatives first with it getting stuck. So 1, 2, 3, boom. Just like that, podcasting magic. We now have a wonderful picture of the human anatomy, the abdomen of a woman. The uterus would be right around there. We can also all appreciate that this woman goes to the gym and works out. So double thumbs up for me on that. But even though I've got it labeled, let's run through it real quick. Stomach is right here. This is the liver. The large intestine, so that's the transverse colon, the descending colon. I know this is not a great image. I'm doing the best I can, folks. I'm not a great artist. Descending colon, small intestines here, small intestine, large intestine. The rectum is here. And my son wanted to contribute to the episode, so he said that's poop. He drew, you can see just the top part of it. But that brown part there at the right here, that's poop. All right. So thank you, Sam. You added that. This part here, we're going to be talking about that in just a little bit. There's the vertebrae and the spinal cord, etc. So what happens if the barium sulfate gets stuck in the digestive system? So because barium sulfate is insoluble, if the person's doing a barium swallow, so they drink the chalky solution, the woman's mouth is going to be, make sure I'm in the microphone, the woman's mouth is way up there, very tall woman, which, hey, I'm quite all right with. I have no problem with that. They drink the solution. It coats the stomach, the intestines, small intestines, large intestines. The idea is that once the imaging is done, the doctor may prescribe a prescription strength laxative, whatever the doctor feels necessary. And then the barium sulfate essentially is going to go right there what my son drew, in the poop. And then it leaves the system. However, the first negative, what happens if it gets stuck or for some reason it's slowed down somewhere in the digestive system? Now, I'm pointing here, we're going to point to the large intestine. We're going to use that as the example. What if the barium sulfate gets slowed down or stuck in the large intestines? Now, why would that happen? Well, if it's getting slowed down or stuck, it's because digestion is impaired for some reason. Well, why would the digestion be impaired? Well, there's a number of reasons why it could be impaired. We're going to go over just 3 here, so I'll write it up here. Make sure, I think, yeah, it's going to show up in the video. So number 1 would be a tumor. Now, it's important to remember with the tumor, that is, it's not a tumor. It's not a tumor. Extra credit if you know the reference to that. It could be a tumor, a physical blockage or impediment to food, or in this case, the barium sulfate getting out down into the poop. Okay? So a tumor. Number 2, reason for delayed or impaired digestion could be, the pressure's on, folks, to get this spelled right, dehydration. Somebody's very dehydrated because that can cause constipation. Right? So make sure you drink your fluids. In fact, shameless plug here, I got a little bit of SMB pre-workout. Well, it's not really a shameless plug because I don't sell it anymore. Late work night last night, so a little bit of caffeine. I do not sell this anymore, so this is not a shameless plug. That's my pre-workout. It's got a little caffeine in it. But dehydration, all right? So if they become dehydrated, it's certainly going to cause constipation. I've seen x-ray images of the abdomen where you can see the transverse colon, the descending colon, and then you see it looks like little cotton balls almost in there. That is fecal matter that's all backed up. The person is very constipated. They're going to need laxatives, like some Miralax or milk of magnesia or something like that, some sort of form of an osmotic laxative. Okay? So dehydration can cause it. Related to, I guess you could say related to dehydration, because this certainly could cause dehydration, I guess. I guess these are all could be related in some form or fashion. Medication. Right? An example of a medication that can certainly impair digestion. Ooh, the pressure is on. Let's see if I get this right. Anticholinergics. 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 Anticholinergics, they can be used for like motion sickness, Parkinson's, anticholinergics. If there's any type of like bladder issue or urinary problem or issue, the doctor may prescribe an anticholinergic. The reason for that, and this is all just extra credit, folks, here. Part of this is extra credit also to see if I even remember it, is this part right here, choline. Now, we've talked about choline in previous episodes a lot, right? The body does make choline through a process called the Kennedy pathway, where it makes phosphatidylcholine, which is necessary for the membranes of our cells, so very, very important. Also, we eat choline. If you eat like liver, which I love liver. I mentioned that before, I love liver. Liver, is it like some nuts? I'll put a list up here. I don't remember off the top of my head. Like wheat, if you're on like a vegan diet, but it can be high in choline, or relatively high, depending on the food source. So we can get it through dietary sources. Also, choline is a nutritional supplement. So it's in like nootropics, pre-workouts, again, SMB pre-workout. Not a plug because I do not sell anymore. I'll pop it up here, but it has alpha GPC in it. That is a form of choline. Now, with regards to pre-workouts and nootropics, the reason for that being in those supplements is the choline is used by the body. In the case of nootropics and pre-workouts, it's used by the neurons in the brain, which your brain would be way up there. It is used to make, I believe I'm spelling this right, folks, acetylcholine, which is a neurotransmitter. And so if you have a boost in acetylcholine, the idea is it can boost like focus, attention, which is great if you're taking it as a nootropic and you're preparing for an exam, like you're doing an all-night study session or you're actually taking a test. You want that improved focus when you're taking an exam. If you're taking it as a pre-workout and you're trying to hit like a PR for deadlift or something, you want that dialed in focus. Hence, you get an increase. The idea is you get an increase in acetylcholine if you're actually taking a decent dose of choline as a supplement. Okay? However, acetylcholine is used throughout the whole body. As I mentioned, anticholinergics can be used for like bladder issues, for an example, because there's a muscle surrounding the bladder called the detrusor muscle. I believe it's how it's pronounced. So when we go to urinate, men and women, that muscle contracts and it squeezes the bladder and pushes the urine out. Well, it contracts because acetylcholine is stimulating receptors on the muscle that then result in it contracting. Now, there's also acetylcholine receptors in the intestines. and that acetylcholine stimulating those receptors is necessary for peristalsis, that kind of smooth muscle contraction that pushes the food substances through the digestive system. Now, a little bit of extra credit, the type of receptors in the intestines and in the bladder, also in the pupil of our eye, it's another one, for example. But like I said, acetylcholine is used throughout the whole body. That type of acetylcholine receptor is called a muscarinic, muscarinic, muscarinic acetylcholine receptor. And I believe it's M1 through M5. You neurology peeps and pre-med and doctors can correct me on that. I believe it's M1 through M5 for muscarinic acetylcholine receptors. The type of receptor, which we're definitely going to be talking about this in future episodes, it's a big topic. GPCR, G protein couple receptor. So essentially the anticholinergics can act as antagonists to muscarinic acetylcholine receptors in the intestines. That can definitely impair digestion, which can then slow down the exiting of barium sulfate, which could result in it getting stuck or, again, delayed from excretion. Now, just so I guess we complete this, the reason it's called muscarinic is I believe muscarins, which are a type of mushroom, if I'm not mistaken, can also activate these receptors. They call it muscarinic receptors. The other type of acetylcholine receptor, this is just for extra credit, is nicotinic acetylcholine receptors. This is a GPCR, a G protein couple receptor. These are ion channels. Bet you can guess, it says nicotinic. What also stimulates those acetylcholine receptors? Nicotinic ion channels. All right. It's just not related, but just wanted to mention that. Again, I'm glad I could remember that. It's been so long since I've studied this stuff. But yeah, that's the other type of receptor. So these are just three examples, not the only ones, just three examples that come to mind that can impair or slow down digestion, which can then impair or potentially even keep barium from fully exiting the digestive system. So let's use number one, a tumor, as an example. So let's say we have a tumor. It's not a tumor. It's not a tumor. Right there. So it's not completely blocking the large intestine, but it's like 3/4 of the way. And thus it's slowing down. So now instead of barium sulfate being able to take advantage of all that real estate there, it's limited to just this little part right here. So it slows down the exiting of the barium sulfate. Now, I would guess that if somebody's going in for a barium swallow and the doctor thinks that there could be a tumor right there, they're not going to give them barium sulfate where's my phone go? As Nate mentioned, whoever gave you barium for a possible blockage should lose their license. That was the first part. I'll put it up there. So like a potential blockage, yeah, depending on what the doctor thinks, they may not give them barium sulfate as a contrast. They would give them like a water-soluble contrast. For our example, we're going to say if they gave them barium sulfate and there happens to be a tumor there. Now, before the imaging, more than likely the doctor, as part of the preparation, is going to say, don't eat anything. All right, go on an empty stomach, maybe even take some sort of laxative to help clean everything out so they can see it more clearly. Potentially, I don't know. That's up to the doctor. So let's say that the person in this example, they didn't fast and then they ended up eating. They didn't tell their doctor that they ate, whatever. They were embarrassed or they thought they were going to get in trouble or something. So they didn't say that they ate anything even though they did. So what's going to happen is you're going to have food in the small intestine and you're going to have food in the small intestine as I try to talk. And then eventually it's going to get into the large intestine where the water is going to be extracted, the part that can't be digested. And then you end up with poop. All right. Well, they take in the barium sulfate, it goes through, and eventually it's going to get to the large intestine. And it's going to be slowed down due to that tumor in our example. And this could happen with or without a tumor. I'm just using the tumor because we listed as one of the reasons there. Well, what could happen is it starts mixing with that food particles that are there. Right? And this could happen as well if they do the barium swallow, they fast, they follow all the doctor's directions, but then it gets slowed, the exit gets slowed down, and they continue to eat. And then the fecal matter gets into the large intestine. It could happen that way too, right? Just a couple of examples. But the food will start mixing, or the waste will start mixing with the barium sulfate. And that mixing, that congealing of the two, this could definitely be an SAT word. I'm not even going to try to spell it. I want to put it up here. Inspissated, right? That kind of congealing mixes together. And what could happen if they don't go to the doctor to get that taken care of, it could turn into a barolith, Barolith, which is like a barium sulfate fecal matter stone in that large intestine, our example here, which is no bueno. Okay? So, a couple of things with the barolith. Well, let's just say I'll use brown, just for fun. Let's say we have our barolith like right here. I'm just using an example. And what happens if that barolith is just big enough to fit right in here? It's a stone. Now you have, because that tumor there, you have a complete impaction. Nothing is going to be able to get through. And as more and more fecal matter come through, right, if they're already not having any symptoms, comes through, that's just going to get bigger and bigger and bigger because that barium is mixing through it, because the barium sulfate is insoluble. It's going to keep mixing and mixing. That barolith is going to get bigger and bigger. But now you have a complete blockage there. Well, now nothing's going to be able to get through, so they're going to get very constipated. But also, if it cuts off the blood supply, because since this is the digestive system, there's a lot of blood supply here. If it cuts off that blood supply, you could start getting death of the tissue death in the large intestine there, necrosis. And the doctor is going to have to go in there and remove that barium, or that barolith, I should say. But if it's too late, they may have to start removing parts of the bowel because it's dead. There's nothing that can be done. No bueno at all. Now, another thing that could happen is that barolith can be very abrasive. It could perforate or break through and damage that large intestine wall there. And so what happens from that is you could get any barium sulfate gets out of the large intestine. Also, waste, the fecal matter, gets out into the abdomen. And that takes us to number 2. What happens if it gets out? Okay, so let's go with number 2 now. No pun intended, number 2. Number 2, talking about number 2. So the barium sulfate gets out along with the fecal matter. And let's use a different example here. Let's say there is a perforation, and I mentioned that before with the barolith. There's a perforation there in the small intestine. Let's change it up a little bit. Now, perforation essentially means like it's breaking through, like there's some sort of damage where now it's gone through the wall. In the case of the barolith, the large intestine, but we'll use a perforation here in the small intestine. Well, why would a perforation occur? I mean, there's a number of reasons, just like with, why would digestion be impaired? There's a number of reasons for that. Just a couple that come to mind. One would be some sort of accident. So a car wreck certainly could cause a perforation, like damage to the abdomen. They could cause a perforation. If somebody is attacked, I guess I don't want to get, dinged or something on social media, but if somebody takes a sharp object, and you get my drift, that could certainly cause a perforation there in the abdomen, or in this case, the small intestine. Another example could be if the person has surgery. That's another reason why after surgery, if they're doing the doctors are doing imaging after surgery, often barium sulfate will not be used as a contrast, because if there's any damage, any perforations that occur during the surgery, I guess the more complex, the more possibility of a perforation, you could have this leakage of the barium sulfate into the abdominal cavity. All right. Now, surgery, I had a colonoscopy 2 years ago. I think it was like 2 years ago. Around this time, this is the end of February 2026. It was around this time a couple years ago, I think. The actual procedure itself, for anybody who's never had a colonoscopy, is wonderful because you're asleep and it's like the deepest sleep I've had in a long time. However, the preparation is pretty crappy. I'm here all night, folks. All right. This is a couple of examples of what could cause a perforation there. All right. So the example we're using in this one, number 2, is that there's a perforation in the small intestine. So let's say, they get, attacked or something like that. Whatever. Well, you could have, if they're eating food, obviously, maybe they just had dinner and then they got attacked or something like that. And so the food's going to go through there and the food's going to leak out into the abdominal cavity. Well, that food's going to have bacteria in it. And the bacteria is going to eventually get to the red area here. This red area. And this is where we're going to talk about that. So what is this red area? There's like I don't know if you can see it. Maybe I can zoom in. Oh yeah, you can see it because I'm looking at myself here. This double loop right here that goes from the bottom of the stomach to the bottom of the small intestine. You have another loop that kind of comes around here to where the uterus would be, and then around the rectum. It goes up the back side there, right behind the vertebrae. And then you have it also going around the intestine, small intestine, large intestine, stomach, liver. All that together is called the peritoneum. Peritoneum. Okay? You could break it down even further. The parietal peritoneum, that's part of the peritoneum that goes over the abdomen, the front of it's this double loop as well, which is called the greater omentum. And the part of the peritoneum here, the back of it, that's the mesentery in the back, that's called the parietal peritoneum. And then it also encases or goes around, wraps around, so to speak, the intestines, large intestines, the vital organs. That's called the visceral peritoneum. And then again, the greater omentum, which is in the documentation, they said it's called like the apron because it's not only like a membrane tissue, but it's also fat that covers it, part of the greater omentum. Now, we're going to go back to the food leaking out here, okay? I want to go back to this because I failed to talk about the peritoneum at the beginning. It just reminded me when I was talking about it here. There's a lot of jobs that the peritoneum can have. Right? The one that I remember the most, or it's the easiest for me to remember, is I'll put it down here. It reduces friction. Oh my gosh, I can't spell. Friction. So you see that all the organs are kind of laying on top of one another. I mean, my bottom, my sternum's here, my belly button's like right down there. I mean, there's a lot of stuff down there in the abdomen, a lot of organs, etc. And then you got lungs up here. Hit the microphone. You got lungs up here, you get your heart, and etc. They're all on top of one another. There's movements. There's the peristalsis that's occurring in the intestines. We're moving around in space. So these organs are going to be moving across one another. And that movement, that rubbing can cause friction, which causes heat, which could cause damage. So the peritoneum, it releases like lubricating substances. And so it can help reduce that friction. That's just one job of the peritoneum. Again, there's a lot of it. In the greater omentum here, I wrote it here, it can provide cushioning or insulation because it has fat in there as well. And then I put restrict infection. It's not the best word usage. Is it coming up in here? Yeah, I think you can see it down here. Yeah, you can barely see it there. Oh gosh, that was not good. I'll just say it. Yeah, it's provided like a cushioning. I guess it's not really important if you see the words, if I say it. It provides cushioning, like insulation, and then it reduces, really is the word I want to use, reduces infection. Because again, there's a lot of blood vessels here, but there's a lot of like immune cells here. The immune system is very heavy in here. All right, so it can help reduce infections, which is really good. All right, so now that sorry about that, I kind of forgot to go over the peritoneum first, but we got it. Now unfortunately, the person gets attacked in our example after they've eaten something, and now potentially food substances along with bacteria are getting out into the body cavity. Now, when Nate mentions, my phone is right here. when Nate mentions plus having to worry about it getting into your peritoneal space, what they're talking about is this area between the parietal peritoneum and the visceral peritoneum. It's called the peritoneal space, peritoneal cavity, etc. So the food substances get out along with bacteria. The bacteria, the food substances, whatever, it's going to land on the peritoneum in this example, and it's going to irritate it. It's going to cause inflammation. That inflammation of the peritoneum is called, make sure, okay, yeah, it's going to show up there. Peritonitis. Peritonitis, peritonitis. That can be very, very, very dangerous. Okay, I got to look in the camera, look at what's recording sometimes to make sure it's still showing up. Now look at the camera. It could be very, very, very dangerous, peritonitis. This, when you have the bacteria in the food that's causing the inflammation in the peritonitis, it is called, now I'll just write it right here. Right here. Bacterial peritonitis. Yeah. Get inflammation. That's going to cause a lot of pain. That's one symptom. That's the primary symptom is going to be a lot of pain. And it also could be what's called rebound pain. So if you go like to your doctor and you're doing like a physical exam, or just if you're going like to an urgent care and your my stomach's hurting, they may palpate around here to see if you're reacting, if you're getting pain, they feel, is that painful? Is this painful? But maybe they can feel something in there. Like, oh, that shouldn't be there. What's this that I'm feeling here? Like a growth or something in there. Not a tumor. They feel something in there. Rebound pain is where the doctor pushes down, and it may be painful, but when they let go, then it's really, really painful. That's rebound pain. That's a big, big, big symptom, or a potential big symptom of peritonitis. Ascites, that's like fluid retention, where you'll get like these people that have like almost like a basketball in their stomach. They get a lot of fluid retention. That could be another symptom of it, but a lot of pain. There's other symptoms, but a lot of pain, rebound pain, fluid retention. The danger with the bacterial peritonitis is, remember, there's a lot of blood vessels here. And that bacteria, if it gets into the blood, into the capillaries, and it gets into circulation, could lead to systemic inflammation, sepsis, no bueno. So that is not good. That's a danger of it. Now we'll get into what happens if, the person is fasting in preparation for a CT scan, and the doctor gives them barium sulfate. So there's no food involved. They've maybe taken laxatives to help get all the food out, to clean it out. So there's a much smaller chance that there's going to be food there, but the barium sulfate leaks out. Again, as Nate mentioned, if there's a perforation, the doctor's likely not going to give you barium sulfate, but just for example's sake, the barium sulfate leaks out, and that barium sulfate is going to land, potentially, in this example, it's going to land on the small intestines around the side of the perforation. It could also land on the peritoneum. Just in this example, it gets like on those two areas. Try to keep it somewhat simple. But in this case, because it's just the barium sulfate, so not bacteria involved in this example, unlike the food and the waste, the fecal matter, this is, man, I run out of room quick on this. Let's write it over here. This is chemical peritonitis. Chemical peritonitis can also occur if somebody has an ulcer. So there's a hole that forms in the stomach due to the gastric juices. The gastric juices get out, irritates that peritoneum. They can get chemical peritonitis from that as well. So you get the chemical peritonitis that can occur here. Again, it's causing irritation there in the small intestines, irritation, inflammation there. What eventually can happen, or what could happen, I should say. Let me get rid of this. I'm going to be doing podcasting editing on the fly. Oh, you know what I'll do? I will do more podcasting magic. So I'm going to clean some of this off in 3, 2, 1. Boom, I'm back. Just like that, folks. Look at that. Cleaned off. Podcasting magic there, folks. So the barium sulfate lands here on the peritoneum, causes the chemical peritonitis. What could happen is part of the coagulation cascade. Boy, you pre-med students, doctors, well, you can correct me on this because that gets intense for me. But what could happen is the body will start laying down what's called fibrin. And that's like fibrin, the coagulation cascade, I believe it's factor 1A. Fibrin is from, I don't know if I'm spelling this right. Fibrinogen, you guys can, I'll put it up here if I get it wrong. I could be spelling that wrong. Fibrinogen, which is factor 1, it's not activated. So fibrinogen gets activated, turns into fibrin. Fibrinogen is activated, I believe, through thrombin, which is factor 2A. Prothrombin is factor 2, but it gets activated. Then thrombin activates or converts fibrinogen into fibrin, which is fibrinogen is factor 1. Fibrin is activated, so it's 1A, the coagulation cascade. But the fibrin is sticky. All right, it forms like a mesh, and it forms like a mesh over the sites of irritation here, 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 and it's sticky. I think the idea is the fibrin, like if you have a cut on your finger or something, the platelets will cause like a plug to stop any of the bleeding or to prevent further damage, I guess. The fibrin goes over it to keep like the platelets there. It's kind of the idea. So the fibrin is laying down. Again, it's like a sticky mesh that lays down. Well, what's the issue with that? Barium sulfate is insoluble. There's no way to get rid of it because now you're gluing it to the tissue here, if there was a way to get rid of it. I mean, there is. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Or at least some of it can be gotten rid of. But eventually, the body's going to try to remove it because it's like, oh, we still have this foreign substance here, this barium sulfate. It's insoluble. It's not us, all right? So the immune system is going to send in, for example, like macrophages. Macro, Phages, macrophages. And the macrophages, what they try to do is essentially engulf the barium sulfate, a process called phagocytosis. I'll put it up here, phagocytosis. It's going to try to eat it. But again, the barium sulfate is insoluble. So macrophages can't really do anything with it because it can't get rid of it. So the body's like, okay, we can't get rid of it because it's insoluble. So we're going to try to wall it off, essentially isolate it from the rest of the body. And that's where fibroblasts can come in. And I believe fibroblasts, what they could do is eventually lead to collagen formation. Collagen formation, which essentially means you're starting to get scar tissue. So what's the danger in all this? Well, the fibrin is sticky. Remember, it forms like a mesh. Well, the small intestines here, they're all coiled around one another. You know, I'll put I guess a better image of it up here. You know, and what could happen is that fibrin could cause parts of the intestine that should not be connected together to become connected together. So it could create like kinks, or it can create areas where, just like with the tuma here, you get a narrowing of the lumen where the chyme and the food substance would go through. Right? You could get weird twists and turns that occur because parts of the small intestine that should not be stuck together are getting stuck together due to the fibrin activated factor 1. The peritoneum, peritoneum could get stuck together. It could get stuck to the small intestines where it shouldn't be, or part of the visceral peritoneum. You know, it can create like physical changes in it that should not be there that could lead to an impaired digestion and lead to, potentially it could lead to necrosis if the impairment gets so bad that it completely cuts off blood supply. That's not good. All right. So you could have further digestive problems for the rest of ever, because the fibroblasts lay down collagen, which is scar tissue, which means if it's not taken care of, which means these weird, awkward kinks, or the decrease in the diameter of the lumen, these weird turns, twists and turns that occur due to the sticky fibrin, they are now permanent due to the collagen being laid down and scar tissue being formed. So that can cause issues there, right, in terms of it getting out. Now, if there is a leakage of the barium sulfate, I was going to talk about this, like getting rid of it, then surgery has to be done. Yeah, from my knowledge, surgery has to be done. And they can try to wash it with like saline to try to get as much of the barium sulfate out. They can try to pick it out, but there's only so much that can be done if it's all over, because then, you're really having to do, chop the person up and everything. And that's no bueno. So, that's only if it's causing a problem. I've read medical, journals and such where people have a barium sulfate, it leaks out into their abdomen, and they've never had any problems. So if there's no problems, then don't do the surgery, but only if it causes issues. But that's just some examples of what could happen and the dangers, as Nate put so greatly in their comment here, that could happen if the barium sulfate gets out. So in cases of, if there's like a blockage, edema, if there's any believed perforation, for example, then a lot of times the doctors will give a water-soluble contrast. So if there is leakage, then it's not going to cause all this problem. All right? So I think that about covers everything I wanted to cover. Now we're going to get into Nate's comment here. Again, thank you, Nate, for that comment. These are the type of comments. I mean, I love every comment. I really, really do. I love every single comment. You all take time out of your valuable day, you're taking valuable time, to comment on a video of mine. And I greatly appreciate you taking the time to do it, positive or negative, whatever. You're still taking time out of your valuable day. And I really appreciate that. I really, really do. But these are the comments I love. Again, I'm not a doctor. I'm not a chemist. I enjoy reading and learning about this stuff, but I get stuff wrong all the time. So I like it when somebody, because Nate talked about how they learn that on the first day of school. So it sounds like Nate has some sort of medical training or formal education in that. Perfect. Let me know when I get stuff wrong, because I'm here to learn and to share what I've learned. But part of that is that it's a back and forth. So I greatly appreciate the feedback. Now, I wanted to also talk about when he said, whoever gave you barium for a possible blockage should lose their license. On that, to be honest, I'm almost 100% sure it was barium sulfate they gave me so long ago for the imaging. I'm just guessing maybe that the doctors thought it could have been a blockage. I don't know. That was, when I had that imaging done, some of you watching this were probably not even born. Like, it was like 3 decades ago. It was a long, 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 long time ago. And so I can only guess that for basically any medical procedure, there's going to be positives and negatives. And so I'm sure if it was barium sulfate, the doctors believe that the positive far outweighed the negatives. And that's why they gave it to me, I think. They could have given me a water-soluble contrast, just to the best of my knowledge. I don't even remember what I did last week, so I probably got it wrong. But I seem to remember that I believe it was barium sulfate. That rings a bell in there. So I think that pretty much covers all of it. There's much more I could talk about. We can get into the mediastinum up here around the heart, mediastinitis. If you guys want that, I'll talk about that. But that's really what I wanted to focus on. So if you're curious about wait a second, why did Nate comment on the video? Like, comment on your post, what was the comment in relation to? Well, you can watch this video. I'll see if I can put it over here. And this is the video where I talked about getting the CT scan and the possible usage of barium sulfate as the contrast, which is why Nate made the comment. So you kind of get the prequel. This is the sequel to the prequel. But watch that video if you're curious. And until then, I'm going to have some more SMB pre-workout, folks. Enjoy the rest of the day. Thanks again for watching or listening. Have a good one, folks. Adios. Bye.